I've had the same discussion in multiple sessions over the past week or two. And whenever I have the same conversation over and over again with clients, I think this really ought to be a video because obviously it's affecting multiple people. So that's what I want to share with you all today. And it's been actually a little surprising to me because it's so basic, it's so obvious when you think about it, but it's something that people often forget, but has the power to make your communication significantly stronger. My name is Trisha Veldman. I am a speech and confidence coach and founder of the platform Powerful and Poised. You can find out more about me at powerfulandpoised.com. One of the things that makes someone a powerful, strong communicator is, without a doubt, specificity. What do I mean by specificity? Being very clear, being very intentional, not talking in vague concepts that leave people wondering, like, what exactly was that? And so if someone walks away after hearing you explain something and they can't articulate what you've just said, then either they weren't paying attention or it wasn't clear enough that they were able to actually walk away understanding the message. And there are times, of course, when we're all a little vague and talk in circles and we're also thinking through our thoughts. But if you want to be a really powerful, strong communicator, then something to practice is being very specific with your wording. Now, how do you be more specific? Easy. Two things. Use examples and use analogies. Examples and analogies will put things into perspective and make things, which is vague and broad and general, into something specific. So for example, this came up with a client of mine who has an AI startup. Now there are bajillions of AI startups these days, and he was trying to explain to me what he does. And he was using a lot of terms like efficiency. This will delegate and automate tasks to help improve your workflow. And it's like, cool, great, I still don't get it. And so when I realized, like, I still don't know what you do, I had to ask him to be more specific. And he was like, well, I mean, how do I be more specific? So I had to kind of coax it out of him. Give me an example. And if you can't think of an example off the top of your head, just a generic example, use an actual example from the thing that you're talking about. So in his case, I said, give me an example of a potential client. He's a new business, so he doesn't have any clients or customers yet. But I said, what would a potential client actually use this for? So this wasn't his business in particular, but if you have an AI startup geared towards helping social media content creators optimize their strategy. What does optimize your strategy really mean? What you could say is, I help content creators write, schedule, and post their content in a very smooth and efficient way by using things like calendars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you go into the details of what you do, but making it very, very specific so that people understand. And sometimes we're afraid of being too specific because we think people don't want all that info. It might go over their head. And that is absolutely true some of the time. And a lot of the times, less is more. You don't need to be so in the weeds with details. But there's a difference between getting so specific that people get lost and giving a clear example or analogy so that things make sense. So for example, for me in my profession, if someone asks me what I do and they say, well, how do you help a client? I could say, well, I help with speech and communication. Very vague, very broad. It's true. That's what I do. And sometimes we think, well, I have to just say that so that people don't feel excluded. If I get too specific, they might think, oh, well, I don't need that. But if I just say speech and communication and leave it there, they're not going to know exactly how it is that I help people. A lot of people do communication in a very different way. So to make what I do more specific, I usually say that I help people on public speaking, speaking voice work, and accent modification. There's a lot more that I do actually. And I've also started branching out to do more corporate training around communication in general, not just speech and delivery. But I don't want to overwhelm people by sharing every single detail. So you get specific with a few examples. For example, I help coach people to get over their anxiety around public speaking. Very specific, but also rather broad because public speaking means a lot of things. So we don't have to worry so much about, oh, well, if I'm too specific, I'm going to like make people uninterested. Rather, it's acknowledging that if I give a clear example of something that I do, it's going to land with people better so that now you can turn off this video and know, oh, one thing Trisha does is help people overcome anxiety public speaking versus, oh, she's a speech coach, which also includes articulation and diction and voice and accent and a whole bunch of other things. So, yes, I do all of those, and it's very helpful to give people an example so that things click and make sense. Another tool to add more specificity is analogies. Now, if you're not someone who can come up with analogies quickly on the spot, then I encourage you to have a few analogies handy that relate to what it is that you do or the message that you're trying to convey. So, for example, an analogy that I use very often when I'm having a consultation with a potential client and they say, well, what exactly is speech coaching? Or I'm just having a conversation with a person, they say, well, what does a speech coach do? I can give the examples of, well, I help with public speaking. For example, I had a client who wanted to be more comfortable dating, and dating is a form of public speaking because that's having conversations with strangers. So I helped her overcome her social anxiety for that, for example. But I also like to use the analogy that speech coaching can be thought of similar to personal training, and speech therapy, which I do have a degree in speech therapy, so sometimes people are like, well, what's the difference? Speech therapy is more similar to physical therapy. So someone would pursue speech therapy or physical therapy if they have an injury or a physical problem that they need help rehabilitating. Speech coaching, much like hiring a personal trainer, would be more for the person who simply wants to improve. There's nothing structurally or anatomically wrong or out of alignment, but they just want to improve. And that is essentially what speech coaching is. It's much like hiring a personal trainer. It's you're getting better, but there's not a physical ailment. And that's an analogy that I've used a bajillion times, and it helps things click for so many people. And I remember when I first thought of that analogy, I was like, oh, that is actually really helpful for me to explain this. So I'm sharing this because a few of my clients in having these conversations felt a little overwhelmed, and they thought, but I just don't think in analogies. I know someone who is just the master of analogies. He can use an analogy in like literally every sentence. I don't necessarily think of analogies in all contexts. I would say I'm decent. I'm probably average at coming up with analogies on the spot, but it is something that I really admire in other speakers. And so I've actively worked on trying to be better at coming up with analogies. But even if you don't want to do that, that's why I suggest have a few handy that are relevant to the thing that you're going to be talking about more than other things. And then the more comfortable you get using analogies in general, then probably the more comfortable you'll get coming up with them on the spot if you need to. So here's your homework. If you are a business owner, or you just want to get better at explaining your job, or you want to get better at explaining something else about yourself, let's say you're constantly asked about what you do for fun or hobbies, and you think, oh gosh, I'm always pretty vague in my responses. Like, oh, I like to be creative. Cool, give some examples. Like, what do you like to do creatively? Do you like to write? Do you like to draw? Do you like to cook? Do you like to act? whatever it is. But think of something in your life that you want to express well, but you feel like sometimes gets misunderstood. If it's often getting misunderstood, then likely you have room to make it more specific. Or you can help put things into perspective and help things click better for people by using an analogy. So your homework is to come up with 3 to 5 specific examples or analogies related to this topic. Bonus points if you practice making the analogy or the example relevant to whoever it is with whom you are speaking. For example, this morning I had a session with a client and I noticed in his background he had a piano keyboard. And so as we were talking through how to eliminate filler words, I used the analogy of learning to play the piano. I said right now it might feel a little monotone because you're learning the steps, you're learning the foundation, much like if you're learning the notes of a new song on the piano, it's not going to feel or sound like a song yet. We add the rhythm, we add the music of the voice later once the foundation is built. And that clicked for him because he plays piano. And we use the piano analogy again later, talking about how we learn in general. And so when you're able to notice things about your conversation partner or about your audience, if it's a larger group, and use analogies or examples that are very specific to them, they're much more likely to retain the information because it connects to something in their own world. So this is something that you can actively practice by, one, thinking about the things in your life that you're often expressing and maybe getting feedback that, oh, it wasn't super clear, I don't get it. But two, start to notice examples and analogies that other people use that you really like. A lot of the analogies I use at work, for example, are ones that I've heard my boss use because he is the king of great analogies and his are so clever. And sometimes I'll use one of his for a while and then I'll think of one that actually is a little more personal to me and makes more sense for my life, or that I'll use with clients and notice it clicks with my clients a little bit better. So he might use the analogy of jumping out of an airplane for commitment or whatever, and I might use the analogy of riding a skateboard for that same committed energy. But the point is, the more you listen out for those very specific examples and analogies, the more likely you are to use them yourself. But you have to do this actively. So it's not necessarily going to just happen by passive listening, but actively notice and appreciate the specificity in other people's communication and then start practicing that on your own. But a very tangible, practical thing to do right now is make a list of 3 to 5 common examples or analogies for the thing that you're talking about the most, if you feel like you're not always very specific or that you're being misunderstood. Let me know how that works for you and leave a comment sharing a very specific example or analogy that you particularly like, either that someone else uses or that you came up with for yourself. I would love, love, love to hear it. And if you want to go deeper on understanding how to overcome public speaking anxiety, I have several videos on this channel about increasing your confidence, as well as an online self-paced course called Show Up Sure: Secrets to Embody Confidence for a Lifetime. So I highly encourage you to check that out. Thank you so much for watching.